I didn't correct him when he introduced me as my sister. She does electrical work. Like it was something to whisper, like he needed to soften it before anyone could react. That was 4 years ago. I remember standing in my parents' kitchen, holding a paper plate with a piece of pie on it, and my brother said those words to his girlfriend like he was apologizing for me in advance. She smiled politely. I smiled back. Nobody said anything else about it. I went home that night and sat in my truck in the driveway for a while before I went inside. I'm an electrician. Licensed journeyman, at the time. I'd been in the trade since I was 22, straight out of a 2-year apprenticeship program I'd found on my own after 1 semester of community college, convinced me that sitting in a classroom for 4 more years sounded like a slow death. My parents didn't yell when I told them. They just got quiet in that particular way that's worse than yelling. My mom said, "Well, as long as you're happy." My dad nodded and went back to his newspaper. My brother, who was finishing his business degree at the time, didn't say anything at all. He didn't need to. The silence said it. For the next few years, I showed up at every family thing, and every family thing went roughly the same way. They'd ask my brother about his job at the financial firm. They'd ask about his bonus, his apartment, whether he was getting promoted. They'd turn to me eventually and ask, "How's work?" Not what I was working on. Not what I'd learned or built or fixed. Just, "How's work?" The way you ask someone about the weather. I'd say fine. They'd nod. We'd move on. I didn't tell them that I loved it. That I'd gotten my journeyman's license on the first try, which my instructor said almost never happened. That I'd started picking up side jobs on weekends because I was good at it, and word was getting around. I didn't tell them any of that because it was clear they didn't actually want to know. They wanted me to say fine so they could go back to asking my brother about his 401 neng. So I said fine. And I kept working. The side jobs turned into something I hadn't planned for. A contractor named Paul, who I'd done 2 or 3 jobs with, called me one afternoon and said he had more work than he could handle and asked if I wanted to partner on a bid. I said yes, that's without really thinking about it. We won the contract. A commercial renovation on the east side of the city, about 4 months of work. It paid well, better than well. After that, Paul asked if I wanted to keep going as a team. I said yes again. Within about 8 months, we weren't really a team anymore. We were a company. We filed the LLC, got our contractor's license, opened a business account. I was 27, Paul was 43, and had been doing this for 20 years. He knew the operations side, I knew the technical side. We split it evenly and agreed we'd figure out the rest as we went. I didn't tell my family. Not because I was hiding it, not exactly. It was more that every time I imagined bringing it up, I'd picture their faces. Not proud, not excited, but cautious, like they'd want to manage my expectations. Like my mom would say, "That's wonderful, honey, but running a business is very risky." Like my dad would nod slowly and say something about health insurance. Like my brother would make a polite sound and then steer the conversation back to whatever he was doing. So I just didn't bring it up. When they asked how work was, I said fine. When my mom asked if I was saving for retirement, I said yes. Which was true. I was doing significantly better than fine, actually, but that felt like information they hadn't earned yet. Year 1, the company cleared just under $400,000 in revenue. Paul and I reinvested most of it. We hired 2 electricians to work under us. We bought a second van. We started bidding on bigger projects. Year 2, we crossed $700,000. We hired an office manager named, well, she's not important to the name, but she kept us from drowning in paperwork. We got our first contract with a property management company that owned 12 buildings in the metro area. Recurring work, the kind of thing that lets you actually plan. I bought a house, a real one, not a starter. 3 bedrooms, a garage big enough for equipment storage, a backyard with a fence my dog could actually run in. I paid cash for the down payment and didn't blink. My realtor thought I was joking until I wasn't. I still went to family dinners. I still said fine when they asked about work. My mom still asked if I was saving for retirement. I still said yes. At one point, my brother got a raise and my parents took the whole family out to dinner to celebrate. A nice place, cloth napkins, the kind of menu that doesn't have prices listed. My dad ordered champagne. My brother made a little speech about his career trajectory. I sat there and drank the champagne and thought about the payroll I'd processed the week before. I didn't say anything. I smiled. I ordered the salmon. On the drive home, I called Paul and told him we needed to raise our rates on the next bid cycle. He laughed and said he'd been thinking the same thing. The thing about my brother's girlfriend. I should explain how that part started. Her name is Aubrey. She works in commercial real estate development. My brother started dating her about 2 years before any of this matters. And from the beginning, my parents treated her like she was the answer to a question they'd been asking for years. She was sharp, polished, used to moving in rooms where decisions got made. My mom loved her immediately. My dad called her a real go-getter the first time he met her, which was the most enthusiastic I'd ever heard him about anyone. I met her at a 4th of July cookout at my parents' house. She shook my hand and asked what I did. I said electrical contractor. She nodded with the specific neutrality of someone who has already categorized you and moved on. My brother appeared at her elbow 30 seconds later and redirected the conversation. I didn't think much about it. I went and got another hot dog. About 14 months later, Paul forwarded me an RFP, request for proposal, from a real estate development company looking for electrical subs on a new mixed-use project. Mid-sized, about 8 months of work, good margins if we scoped it right. I looked at the company name, and it was familiar in a vague way, but I'd been looking at a lot of company names by then, so I put it in the pile, and we worked up a bid. We submitted. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the project coordinator asking if we could come in for a meeting with the development lead. We went in. The development office was downtown, 12th floor, the kind of place with an espresso machine in the conference room, and a view of the river. Paul and I sat down with our folders and our numbers, and then the door opened and the development lead walked in. It was Aubrey. She didn't recognize me right away, or if she did, she didn't show it. She sat down across from us, looked at our materials, and started asking questions. Good questions, actually. Specific, detailed, the kind that tell you immediately whether someone knows what they're talking about. She knew what she was talking about. I answered everything directly. Paul handled the contract language. We were there for about an hour. At the end, she gathered her notes and said she'd be in touch. She looked up at me for a second and I could see it click. A small adjustment behind her eyes, something recognizing something. She looked back at her notes. We'll be in touch, she said again. We got the contract. She emailed me directly with the award letter. Professional, brief, exactly what you'd expect. I sent back a thank you note and our certificate of insurance and said we'd be ready to mobilize on the agreed date. We started the job. The project ran 8 months, almost exactly to the schedule. Aubrey and I interacted regularly, site visits, change orders, coordination calls with the general contractor. Direct, organized, no drama. I genuinely respected her professionalism, whatever the family situation was. She never brought up my brother. I never brought up my brother. We both understood the shape of the thing without saying it. About 6 months into the job, my mom called me on a Sunday evening. This wasn't unusual, she calls most Sundays. But about 10 minutes in, she said, "Oh, your brother told me he's thinking about proposing to Aubrey." I said that was nice. She said, "You know, I think she's just wonderful. She's done so well for herself. That development company she works for is really impressive." She said, "I just think it's so important to have a career with real, stability, prestige. Something you can build on." I said, She said, "Anyway, how's work?" I said, "Fine. I hung up about 20 minutes later and sat on my porch for a while with my dog and a beer. The following month, Aubrey and I had a close-out meeting on the project. Just the two of us. Paul was dealing with something on another site. We went through the punch list, signed off on the final documentation, handled the retainage paperwork. At the end, she closed her folder and said, "This was a good project. We'd like to use you again." I said we appreciated that. She was quiet for a second and then she said, "You know, I figured it out. A few months in." I said I thought so. She said, "I didn't say anything because it wasn't relevant to the work." I said that was exactly the right call, in my opinion. "He doesn't know," she said. "Not a question." I said no. She nodded slowly. "I'm not sure how to feel about that." I said I understood completely, and I wasn't asking her to feel any particular way about it. She said, "For what it's worth, you ran a clean job. Your crew was professional the whole way through. I'll give you a reference anytime." I thanked her. We shook hands, and I went out to my truck. Here's the part I didn't see coming. About 3 weeks later, my brother called me. Not a text, an actual phone call, which he almost never does. I answered, and for a second he didn't say anything, and then he said, "Did you know? When you were working with her, did you know it was her?" I said yes. He said, "And you didn't tell me." I said I didn't think it was my information to share. Our professional relationship was between me and the project. His personal relationship was his business. He got quiet. Then he said, "She told me." I said I figured she would eventually. He said, "She told me you run a company, that it's doing well." He said it the way you say something you're still processing. Like the words had a different weight than he expected. I said yes. He said, "How long?" I said a little over 3 years. Another silence. Then, "Why didn't you tell us?" I thought about the champagne at his promotion dinner. I thought about how's work. I thought about the way he introduced me 4 years ago to the woman he was now thinking about proposing to, like I was something to apologize for. I said, "I don't know. It never came up." He knew I was lying. I knew he knew. We let it sit there between us on the phone for a moment. He said, she's going to have a lot of feelings about this." I said I was sure she would. He said, "Dad too." I said probably. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "I'm sorry. For a lot of it, but specifically for how I introduced you that time." To Aubrey. I said I remembered. He said, "Yeah." I said I appreciated the apology. He said, "Okay." We talked for about 5 more minutes about nothing in particular, and then he said he had to go. I said okay. He said he'd see me at Thanksgiving. I said I'd be there. My mom called 2 days later. She'd talked to my brother. She had a lot to say, and she said most of it, and somewhere in the middle of it she started crying, which I wasn't prepared for. She said she didn't know, she didn't realize. She thought she was asking the right questions, but maybe she was asking the wrong ones. She said she was proud of me. She said it twice, like she was trying to make it land properly. I didn't say I know or it's fine or any of the things that would make it easier to move past. Let her say it. I said, "Thank you." I said I loved her. I said I'd see her at the holidays. My dad called the next day, said, "Your mother tells me your company is doing well." I said, "Yes." Said, "Good, that's good." And then he asked about the work. Specifically, what kind of projects, how big, did I have people working for me? Real questions. The kind that meant something. I told him. All of it, more or less. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "You did that yourself." Not a question either. Just a thing he was sitting with. I said Paul and I did it together, but yes. He said, "Your grandfather was an electrician, you know." Did I ever tell you that? I said I didn't know that. He said, 40 years built his house with his own hands. He paused. I think I forgot where we came from somewhere along the way. I didn't say anything. He said, "I'm proud of you, kid." I said, "Thanks, Dad." Thanksgiving was 2 months later. My brother brought Aubrey officially with a ring on her finger that she'd apparently said yes to about 2 weeks after our close-out meeting. My mom made a big fuss over the engagement. My dad shook my brother's hand and then hugged Aubrey, which is a lot for my dad. Aubrey caught my eye across the kitchen when she walked in. She smiled, a real one, not polished or professional, just genuine. I smiled back. At dinner, my dad asked me to tell everyone about the company. My mom put down her fork to listen. My brother sat across from me and didn't say a word the whole time I talked. Just listened with this expression I couldn't quite read, part impressed, part something that might have been the slow burn version of realizing you had the wrong idea about someone for years. I told them about the first bid with Paul, the first contract. Year 1, Year 2, Year 3, the office manager, the property management account. I kept it factual and didn't editorialize. When I finished, my mom said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I thought about how to answer that honestly without starting a different conversation than this one. I said I wanted to build it first before I told anyone. She nodded like that made sense. Maybe it did, Aubrey said. For what it's worth, she runs an excellent operation. She said it to my parents, matter-of-factly, the way she'd say it in a business context. Coming from her, it meant something specific, because they knew what she did for a living and what her opinion was worth. My dad nodded. My mom reached over and put her hand on mine for a second. Dinner went on. We had pie. My brother helped with the dishes, which he almost never does, and at one point he said to me quietly while we were standing at the sink, "I'm glad she hired you." Said I was too. He handed me a dish to dry, and we didn't say anything else about it. I drove home that night with the windows cracked, a little even though it was November, because the air felt right. The streets were mostly empty. I had the radio on low. I thought about the version of me 4 years ago, sitting in this same truck in my parents' driveway, holding a paper plate with pie on it in my head, feeling like something that needed to be explained before it could be introduced. I don't feel like that anymore. I turned onto my street, pulled into my garage, sat there for a second with the engine off. My dog was barking from inside the house. The work van was parked next to my truck, the company name on the side in plain white letters. I looked at it for a second, then I went inside.